Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. I know that it's, 90 degrees outside? And you have other choices, like heading down to the gorges or sipping a beer at the Red Barn, whatever it is. So I'm really happy that you could come. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'd like to thank the library, and I'd like to thank Lynn and everyone else for that wonderful introduction, for reaching out to me last semester when the Techne of Giving book came out, and asking if I would be willing to give a talk about the book and a chat in the stack. I don't often speak at Cornell. It sounds weird to say that, but it's actually true. I don't have many opportunities to speak at Cornell, which isn't to say I don't speak elsewhere. And so this is just a real pleasure for me to speak here. It's also, I think, really appropriate that it happens here in Olin. I spent, a good 2 years in 301 in my Carroll up here writing the book. So it just seems like it makes perfect sense to be speaking about it here with you today in Olin. And also, there's a real debt of gratitude I have to the library and to reference librarians and to a whole series of people without whom I wouldn't have been able to write the book. So, where to begin? Now, I have a bunch of notes, and I just think I'll forgo them, actually, a little bit, and then to get us started. So, where to begin? I mean, this book has a number of beginnings. There's not just one beginning. I could say that it began when I was translating some of Roberto Esposito's work probably 10 years ago. I could say that it began when I came across some, I was reading Heidegger for the previous book. And I don't say that to kind of be proud of that. But you want to be proud a little bit if you're wading through Heidegger. But in particular, there was a certain moment around writing and in particular his notion of technology. And so that was another kind of beginning to this. But I don't think that's exactly, those taken by themselves don't actually add up to a beginning. One of I think the places that the book began was actually in class. I was teaching a class. This would have been probably 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and it's a class that we still offer. So if any undergraduates are interested, I'll do a little marketing. It's called The Cinematic Eye of Italy. And so I was teaching this class, and I had probably a good number of students, 15 students. There are a couple of professors there sitting in as well, working on their Italian. One in particular, David Rosen, who's emeritus now, professor of music. And so I basically decided, that reasons I don't remember, that I wanted the class to look at, and I wanted them really to appreciate a film or films of Antonioni. So this. And you can't force anybody to appreciate anything, and you certainly can't force undergraduates or even a professor emeritus to appreciate Antonioni. He is an acquired taste. But in any case, so I was going to force them to look at Antonioni, and one of there were there are a number of films that I was interested in showing them, but one in particular stood out to me, and I think some of the beginnings of this book came from a clip from an Antonioni film from, this would have been probably 62, maybe slightly over 60, called La Notte, the Night. It's a film, anyone seen this? Ah, okay, good. I don't think I've been in a room with that many people that have seen La Notte, by the way. So I know I'm a Cornell audience. So it's a story of Giovanni and Lydia, a marriage in crisis. Half of the film essentially takes place in the streets of Milan. The other half, those of you who have seen it and care to remember it, takes place La Notte in what would you describe it? A party, certainly. A long party, certainly. A party with Monica Vitti, yes, it's that too. And it's essentially where the crisis between Giovanni, Mastroianni, and Lydia takes place. So what I thought I would do is show you the part of the clip in question, and then tell you a little bit about how that clip steamrolled or brought me to think about some other films. And it's always a treat to watch Antonioni, and I'm going to force you, in other words, to watch this. So let's see.
Capisco, si qualifica come marxista e tecnicamente procede, ma te ne rendi conto? Cosa non difendersi.
Che cos'hai? Vieni qui. Perché piangi?
So, this scene is everyone can hear. My mic is still on, right? Good. Okay. So, this scene is pretty famous among Antonioni watchers, and it's not only for a number of reasons. The scene, for many, seems to speak to a kind of the singularity of Antonioni's cinema. Long takes, the mobility of the camera, the male gaze that anchors that last shot as Lydia is walking away. Students in class, in the class I mentioned, they were interested, though, in particular in this shot, the close-up of the hand, and it seems interesting. What were they interested? What was curious about this? You don't get a lot of close-ups of hands doing what she's doing here, which is, what is she doing? She's picking at the rust. She's touching it rather than picking, maybe better, right? So we talked a little bit about that. What do you do? It seems to be, presumably would be important. We get other shots, by the way, in the film of Lydia's hands. And we sort of left it, that one student in particular made what I thought was a really astute argument, which is that the way that Lydia is touching this, which is not grabbing or gripping or holding, but touching, could be linked to the way that Lydia encounters the city in that shot, so that she's not in some sense a subject of the city. She's touching the city. She's attentive to the city. She's kind of, in the scenes that I won't show you, kind of engaging with the city without, in some sense, really owning the city. She's attentive, right? I thought, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And then I began to wonder, well, what is it about that particular moment of Lydia, woman, engaging with the city, and then emblematically you get this. So are there other scenes that come to mind when you're thinking about Antonioni? And sure enough, there are other films that came to mind. And one in particular, there are two, but the one in particular that I began to spend some time thinking about is a film that appeared before this. It's perhaps, it's perhaps his most famous film, Antonioni's famous film called L'Avventura. Anyone seen L'Avventura? Hands, so everyone has seen L'Avventura, good. So the story of a group of people head out to an island for, it's much more than what I'm about to describe, but just for the sake of time, what happens is that Anna goes missing on the island, and a large chunk of the film is her group of friends, including Claudia, and then Anna's fiancé spend let's just be honest, a ridiculous amount of time looking for her and not finding her. So what's interesting about, and they don't find her, by the way, there are suggestions that she may be returning, right? So what's interesting about the L'Avventura in the island scene is how Antonioni, when you pay attention to it, how Antonioni continually will frame much of the action, when nothing seems to be going on, will frame it around different kinds of holding, right? Different kinds of grips. And grips where? Well, on the boat, as they're making their way out to the island, and then in a series of shots that are just kind of, I don't know, bizarre, let's say, of Claudia, Monica Vitti again, sort of grasping and holding and trying to hold on to the island itself. So let me show you the other, another clip.
Va via, bestiaccia.
È calmo come l'olio.
Non so perché, ma detesto i paragoni in cui entra l'olio.
Buongiorno. Ben alzata. Claudia! Guarda! Mamma mia! Dormito bene? Così. Ieri sera sono andata a letto con l'idea di pensare a una quantità di cose. Poi mi sono addormentata. Io non sapevo che si dormisse così bene su questi affari qua. Ti cullano.
Io ho dormito malissimo.
Salute! Ciao.
Buongiorno.
Okay, let me show you. So the next clip takes place probably 15 minutes later in the film. Anna has already gone missing on the island, and they're out and about looking for her.
Sandro, niente.
Hai visto come mi tratta? Chi? Corrado. Non fa che mortificarmi oggi.
Giulia.
So, there are other examples, but I think sort of hopefully you saw what I was getting at, which is Viti sprawled on the island, sort of grasping, trying to get a hold, right? Grasping and being unable to do that. So then, just to continue the story, and then I'll work it back to the larger question that this was feeding into for me, which was the question of how Antonioni was focusing the spectator's attention on hands and on grips was something that I hadn't really come across in any of the literature around, the critical literature on Antonioni. It's not something that people generally sort of were paying attention to. And it's interesting, I won't do it now with you, but it's possible, sort of from the moment they step into the boat until when they leave the island, of Antonioni putting grips, holding characters, holding on to things, right in the center of the frame repeatedly. And that, I mean, some of that makes sense. You're on a boat and you're on your way to an island. Of course you would want to be holding on, right? But what's interesting is that continues even when they arrive on the island. So then the question becomes, well, so what's, two questions really. So what's going on with Antonioni's emphasis on the hand and on grips? And are there any other examples of holding and gripping and letting go, literally, I mean literally, visually, right, in Antonioni's works? And surprise, there are. And I'm just looking at the time, so I may, you really do want to see this, don't you? I know you do. Maybe I'll show you one clip in particular. This is coming from a film after La Notte called Eclipse. And Let me give you some, how many people have seen Eclipse? Haha, jeez, you're not letting me down. Right, so Eclipse has many things, right? A relationship that's falling apart, beginning of the film. A budding love affair between, again, Monica Vitti, who in the film is called Vittoria, which is interesting, at least for me, in terms of what kinds of things that you can say about the way that Vittoria in the film is portrayed and the way that Antonioni shoots her as Vitti in the film. So it's a story of that. It's a story of capitalism. Much of the action in the first third of the film, no, that's not true. Throughout the film, generally, that's true. Takes place in sort of the equivalent of Wall Street in Rome. They've sort of moved it from Milan to Rome, Antonioni did. And so you get lots of really just powerful scenes of speculative capitalism. And so they're constantly buying and selling things. In particular, one of the main characters, and that's Piero Landaglione, who is interested, to say the least, in Vittoria and Monica Vitti. So this is a scene really from probably like 20 minutes in, it must be. And it's the first time that the two main characters have met. But more importantly, I would say, it's the first time that we see Vitti how can I put this, in dialogue with this kind of space of capitalism, and how Antonioni shoots her vis-a-vis the speculators that are there. So again, just paying attention to how Vitti's gesturing in this scene became important for me.
Bravo. Eccomi. Fa passare.
Mamma. Ah, com'è che sei qui?
Ma io...
Che dici, compriamo?
No.
Io
Chi
compro.
sa niente.
Ho comprato le finsidere a 20, guardi un po' quanto valgono.
Ne ho 2000.
Le tenga, fanno denaro. Tu non mi conosci, ma io sì. Come stai?
Devo partecipare a una dolorosa notizia. Stamane è deceduto, in seguito all'infarto, il collega Visconti Domenico. L'emozione del momento mi impedisce di ricordarlo con parole adatte. Vi prego soltanto di rispettare un minuto di silenzio.
So someone has died, there's a moment of silence, and if we were to continue, you would see, literally, probably less than a minute of silence, and then everything is back to normal. But I would just draw your attention again to this gesture. It's a gesture that repeats itself throughout the course of the film. It repeats itself in particular in closing moments of the film when Pietro and Vittoria are sort of engaging in a kind of strategic war over his advances. Let's put it that way. So, what does this all add up to? Except Antonioni having a fetish for hands, especially Monica Vitti's hands, and he clearly has. He said it repeatedly in interviews that he was fetishizing Vitti, in particular. Her neck and the back of her head. Do with that what you will. So what work did I want this to do? So basically what I was essentially coming to a conclusion that two things. The first was that we we had the figure of Viti, so Claudia and Vittoria in Eclipse and Avventura, and Lydia. We had them engaging with objects in a way that the men in the film, probably everyone else in the film, I don't think it's that gendered, was not. And the way, what was interesting was how we could characterize the kind of that engagement with objects, right? And the engagement with Viti here in particular, and it's constantly, you're just going to have to trust me on this, it's constantly contrasted with in particular with in these scenes, and then later on with the speculator, with Delon, whom we saw, with a holding, with a grabbing, and there's a particularly powerful scene, particularly when Delon is really struggling with her, and she is struggling with him. Let's put it that way, and a struggle around her body, and constantly, relentlessly, Antonioni is giving us shots of this gripping on his part, which gets contrasted with the way that Vittoria in the film is engaging with objects. You will see her continually touching. She walks by a statue and she touches it. She walks by a wall, she touches it, which has led some people to say that she's schizophrenic. She's crazy, which is kind of ridiculous to me. What I wanted to do is I wanted to see if there wasn't a way to get a new perspective on that and ask, is there a way that we could move from this kind of visual grip that you get in the film to something that could respond to a series of demands or questions over here that were more philosophical? So in the book, which I'll come back to the book, right? The book is divided into two parts. The second part of the book are readings of films, and there's a long chapter on Antonioni. The book began with the readings of Antonioni, but the films themselves are meant to answer some questions that I'd been thinking about. I wanted to pose that were much more kind of philosophical questions. And so maybe in the next, last 10 minutes before questions, I can say something about those. I'd mentioned that I had spent some time, translating a number of Italians, Esposito and others, and I also was working on this question of what's proper and what's improper. So hence the title of an earlier book, Improper Life. And so what was a question for me is, when is something your own? What is it that needs to take place so that you can call an object your own? And there's a whole series of legal kind of steps, right? Possession being 9/10 of law and that sort. There are a number of philosophical pieces that I became interested in precisely around the difference between having and holding, and ownership being linked to a certain amount of time that you hold something in your hands. So there's having, which then becomes really a question of the amount of time that one holds something. Well, why would that be important? Well, it's important in this film because what it suggests is that in the gesture, in Lydia's gesture, in Vittoria's gesture, in Claudia's gesture, there's an improper or a subjectivity that isn't defined primarily by how it holds and makes something that subject's own, right? So I'm proper and property kind of working together, right? So what then that suggests is, there's something affirmative. There can be something affirmative in the way that visually, right, and reading the films philosophically about these characters and the way that Antonioni is shooting them, right? So that they're not, the way that they engage with objects and the way that they engage with themselves, and this is a really crucial part, the way that Viti in the last film is engaging with Antonioni, who is relentlessly, she's there all the time in this film. I mean, it's kind of just a relentless. Antonioni is going to capture how Viti herself responds to this attempt, in some ways successful attempt, to really own her image, to make her do, for Vittoria in the film to become Viti and for Viti to become Vittoria, so that there's no difference. And there are a number of really kind of cringeworthy interviews with Antonioni where you're just like, wow. I mean, Hitchcock has nothing on Antonioni when it comes to Viti, right? And Viti herself will say, and there's interviews that haven't been translated yet in a famous one with Oriana Fallaci, where she says, Marlon Brando. Everyone says Marlon Brando is amazing. Of course he's amazing. He doesn't have to show up until 30 minutes into the film. This is before Apocalypse Now. He doesn't have to show up, he shows up 30 minutes into the film and then that's it. I'm there in every frame, from the beginning to the end. So imagine, what that's like. And so I was trying to imagine what that's like. And so what do you get? You get Viti, the actress, evading, deflecting, moving out of the way, not looking to the camera, moving out of the frame, right? Doing all the things that kind of developing a repertoire of gestures, of actions, as a way to deflect, as a way to maintain her own self that can't be appropriated by this apparatus, right? And so that becomes, for me, a very interesting case study, if you want, because it feels like, and today, I speak just for myself, I don't know, we're just constantly being, captured. I don't know, you're captured by your Facebook, you're captured by your Twitter, whatever it is, We're just surrounded by apparatuses. And so here's one response, a Viti's response to this that could be very interesting. I find it to be very interesting as a political and and a philosophical response to this grip, right? The grip of the apparatus. So the philosophical, so that's essentially the second side of this. The first side is, and I won't go really into detail about this, but essentially what I was interested in the philosophical side was precisely this: is there a way that one can engage with objects, a self, one's own subjectivity, a space, that doesn't involve immediately making it one's own? Is there a way that one can, play is the word that is dear to me, and I have a series of kind of a genealogy of play that I trace, modern play that I trace back to Winnicott and transitional objects and phenomena. But in any case, is there a way that we can think this philosophically, that a form of life or a subjectivity that when it's engaged with the world, when it's seeing something, when it's Lydia walking through the streets of Milan and is touching, that isn't immediately, it's not immediately devolving into this is mine, and where mine I translate really concretely, I try to, as a grip, as a holding, and in the film in these films, Antonioni really, I think, is inviting us, consciously or not, doesn't matter, to kind of release that and to think about that. Maybe last piece, and then I'm happy to answer questions or just kind of have a discussion. I've ignored two other films that form the second the reading of the films, and one of them is Visconti's The Earth Trembles. Anyone seen this? I'll hear, yeah, exactly, nailed it. And the other is Germany Year Zero, a Rossellini classic neorealist film. and using those films to essentially lay the groundwork for the reading of Antonioni. So, and the result is this. I don't have the book, but you know the result is back there. It's the question about philanthropy, which came up. You know, to be honest about that, it was a way that the press sort of wanted me to pitch the book. I'm not sure that I'm that comfortable with, you know, I mean, I work in a building that was made possible through philanthropy, so, and a certain kind of gift. I mean, with that said, I mean, I do have an extended critique of gift giving, of a giving that demands something in return. And you could see, hopefully you can see why these female protagonists, Viti in particular, why this idea of giving, how do you give without holding something, becomes really interesting. That's a question I think that ultimately Eclipse may be about, which is how do you give something that you can't hold on to, that you physically can't hold on to? What would that look like? So I think I will end there. I want to leave time for questions, comments, conversation. So thanks.
Thank you. So I want to go back to your comments on the holding and appropriation.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in the concept of appropriation, and I had some chance to read some of your articles previously, and actually I've been thinking more through Agamben when he juxtaposes appropriation versus use.
Yes.
When we understand holding, there are two dimensions of violence that we are putting on the objects, right? Like
violence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
okay.
Okay, it sounded a bit too big and exaggerated in the beginning, but
I didn't hear it.
I like putting it that way because one is appropriation and second is, in a related way, submitting the object to a certain purpose. So you touched upon appropriation as a dimension, but left the other one a bit outside of your talk here. Not use. Use. I mean, certain purpose. So submitting it to a certain purpose. So when we understand play, if I'm not mistaken, then we should be also thinking about the forms of relating with the objects without purposeful relationality, right? So, so use in that sense, putting it back to that conversation, use in that sense still sounds a bit problematic to me time to time because of the connotations of purpose. And second is, so I'm trying to think about that scene of main character walking through the street. Lydia walking in the streets, so she's not holding or appropriating the city, but also, I don't know the movie and the context, but she also looks like she's just walking. She has interest in random people, objects, and she engages with them, but not for a long time, not holding, and she doesn't seem to be taking any of those encounters as, towards certain purpose. So if you could incorporate that in your analysis too, what would you tell about that scene in particular? And also, this is always something in my mind. I hope I can put it in the right terms. But so when people write about play and using something without purpose, I always think like, is it possible? Is it possible at all to think about relationality without any purpose or without any? So maybe it is not like it's not without any purpose, but not just the ones that we already had in mind. For instance, when Agamben talks about putting into new use, it is something that we haven't thought of, but not completely playful maybe. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
So when she walks in that street, can we completely imagine a free walk, let's say, without
a free walk?
Free, like freedom.
A free walk, yeah.
So I hope I could.
Oh, okay. Let's see if I do justice to the question. So if we were to read this, look at that scene in terms not of, in more of Agamben's terms. So there's a use, and what I hear underneath this is an unhappiness on your part with the notion of use, because it's linked in your mind to that one has a purpose. So to use something, one immediately calls with it something like a purpose.
I know he wants to object that too, but I'm also asking, is it possible to think that way?
So I'm not going to answer that question, but what I will say is thinking. Maybe a way to approach this would be, what changes if we were to determine what purpose she's walking on the streets, and to what use is she putting the city? Like why does that question matter? I mean, what would it tell us? What would it enable us to do if we were able to determine the purpose? I can tell you that she leaves the party because she's bored, and because Giovanni, it's his party for his book, and she's kind of just fed up listening to all of this chatter. I mean, remember the beginning of the scene, you just hear chatter all the time, right? So the purpose of the walk is what? It's to escape from that constricting environment. But that's not the same as what occurs during the walk. And it's not fair because I haven't shown you. It's a scene that goes on for a while, and it's cut with Giovanni being bored out of his mind after the party, right? So to return to the question, so at what point then during that walk can one look at the film and say, that's why she's walking, or that's the way that she engages with the child that's crying, or the way that she looks at the time, the clock that's broken, right? So that's an interesting image, by the way. And then the way that the mode with which she touches the wall, the piece of paint, the painting that's peeling. Are there? If I were to tell you what the purpose is, what would that matter? Would it allow you to make an argument about use? I mean, honestly, I don't think that that's the question that is really the one that matters to me, or it's not a question that opens up to other questions that I think matter. If you're asking me, can one use use and purpose in the way that Agamben is using them to devise a reading of that scene? Maybe. And to do that, you would want to, it seems to me, you would want to focus in particular not on the use of the city or any of the, whatever she's seeing, but the use of the self. So, and there it becomes dicier, because how in the world are you going to look at that scene and then make an argument about how she's using, if indeed she's engaging with the self as a form of use? I personally, I'm in awe of the use of bodies. I mean, that's just a phenomenal analysis, right? With that said, I find it limiting to the degree that it doesn't sort of answer questions or allow you to say things about play in a way that matter to me. I don't think that's a cop-out. It's all about what kinds of questions you want to ask in the amount of time that you have, right? So in that sense, I mean, Agamben is great, and I'm completely indebted to his work. The Coming Community is just a phenomenal, for me, it's a phenomenal book, and it's in some ways really at the heart of the last two books. But in terms of reading these characters and reading the films that I want to read, it doesn't give me the tools to do that. So that's a long-winded answer. Sorry, to your great question. I hope that's helpful.
So it's been like 20 years since I've seen an Antonioni film. But the whole time I was thinking of that scene in Blow Up where they pantomime tennis.
Yep.
And then he catches the ball, doesn't he? I remember that, and throws it back. And I remember thinking that was kind of like a self-reflective, a self-conscious comment that Antonioni was making on his art making in general. I don't know. What, do you have any thoughts of that? And does it connect at all with, with the grasp that you're talking about?
I didn't, that's interesting. I didn't think about it that way. I mean, that scene, anyway, I've read countless readings of that, and all of them seem believable to me. I mean, it's just, it's one of those open moments, you know, and there are a number of open moments. I mean, you know, you play tennis, right? I mean, and so that makes me think that there are some connections clearly running to this. You know, more than that, I mean, the other part of it is that you hear it before. I mean, there's a whole play on hearing it before you see it that I remember, and so that might be something else in the way that you're forced. You can actually get hold of it, and that leads me to something else which I should have said, which is that I haven't shown you the most famous clip from an Antonioni film, and that's the last 7 minutes of Eclipse. And the blow-up scene sort of reminds me of that. And for those of you who've seen it, you remember that it's, and if you haven't seen it, you should just see Eclipse. But VT exits, and then you get Antonioni's camera panning back, sort of traveling through the various places that the film had taken the spectator. Before that, so we're in Rome, and then it ends with with a lamp and eclipse, right, and with all hints of kind of an apocalypse and the rest of it. But it reminds, but this is what that reminds me precisely of what you're talking. It's open in the sense that Antonioni is creating. He's playing games with the spectator, so you think you're going to see some people and you're not. In the same way that you think you're going to see a game and you're not. Undercutting that. To what end? I think, to me, it's to the end. The purpose is to, to throw you back on the spectator, to throw the spectator back on. Well, what am I actually watching? What am I seeing in this? It's just sort of the Bazin phenomenology of long takes or something. And just kind of, I don't know, taking the piss is probably too strong, but, something around that would be the way I would choose to read it. Yeah.
I want to follow up on that, on Blow Up, because I think when you talk about these scenes in particular, you talk about two kinds of holding, right? Yeah. Holding as a kind of a visual apparatus of capturing, and then also holding as a way to play with that apparatus, I guess. Yeah. So in Blow Up, it's very much a film about capture, right? It's about how camera capture truth and camera as a kind of like sexual also penetration, right?
Absolutely.
That kind of thing. So I'm curious, and at the end, a kind of absolute disappearance, which kind of confirm, I guess, Antonioni authority, I think, in that film, right? So I think this film is very much about capturing. So I'm just curious, how holding also in that film probably can become a way to play with a kind of, the idea of capture that you're talking about.
Holding as a way of playing with the idea of
right. I think that's what you're also doing, right?
I wish I had talked to you before I wrote the book, because that would be a phrase that I could really use. Right. I could have used it. I can now a couple of crucial moments in the last chapter. Right. So holding it. So, I guess the one answer. I don't have one answer, but maybe one access into this would be. I mentioned Winnicott before. So, you know, without getting lost in too much of this, I mean, in a Winnicottian notion of play, for a young child, there's the object of phenomenon. It's not just an object; it can be phenomenon, right? Blanket or whatever it is, right? That substitutes for it substitutes for the mother, for the right, and for the good breast, taking it from Melanie Klein, and what all the Winnicottians who will forgive me, but what was interesting for me about that is that the difference between the transitional object and a toy is that the toy is able to maintain it doesn't change for the child. It doesn't change what it is, right? So that it stays that. So a toy is a toy. It's not a plaything. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm getting to the holding. So just hold on. Don't hold on to that too tightly, right? Okay. So then you come back to the transitional object, and what characterizes the transitional object is that the object it isn't one thing. It transitions among different things, right? And it changes, right? So the way that, and there's a beautiful passage in Winnicott where he will say, you know, there's something around attention is a kind of holding, like from tendere. So the way that you attend to something is a way that you hold, and that the young child, holds it in a certain way that doesn't make it a possession. And so it's that holding that is intrinsic to to play, to the transitional object linked to play. And that's not the case with these other objects over here, which we know what they are, or the child knows what they are, and they won't work as a transitional object. So what does that mean for us, or what does it mean for Viti? Is that it becomes a question: if you're faced with capture by, you know, this madman, right? That this really powerful, someone who, I'm speaking of Antonioni, who augments the power of the apparatus, right? Because he does things that people weren't doing before with the camera, right? And doing it for longer. So what choices do you have? And if you're Viti, I mean, Viti the actress, not Vittoria, because remember, Vittoria is the object of our capitalist, and Viti is the object of our director. What does Viti do? And if you go back and look at the interview, she's not going to say, well, you know, I just treat the apparatus as a kind of transitional object. Right? She doesn't say that, right? She doesn't say that, but she suggests, you know, she suggests it, and then if you just look at the kind of the visual cues around this, and then if you begin to read, like, what was actually the filming like? So Antonioni was constantly, you know, filming when she wasn't aware of it or something, right? Which happens a lot, you know. And so then how she reacts to that, or the way that she moves or slides out of a frame, or the way that she deflects the apparatus by not looking at it directly. I mean, the whole series of things that I lay out in the book. All of them, though, premised on treating the apparatus not as this monolithic, I can't do anything about it machine, right? That there are strategies that you can, and that piece I found really interesting for me. So what are the, you know, is there a way of holding someone's gaze, or holding someone else, or the way that you hold, you know, just objects in a way that doesn't allow you, or that blocks capture in some level, and that's captured by the director, but it's also capture of yourself in the way that I own myself, or this is mine, or that's mine, or whatever. Does that make sense? So then holding becomes, in the way that I see it, holding offers some potential for lessening the power that the apparatus has over you. And I've run into resistance from a number of places, a number of people on this. Well, you know, the apparatuses are just, that's what they do. And what are you doing? Kind of, you're essentially saying accept them. Is that what you're saying? And I guess on some level, I am, to the degree that acceptance, it doesn't mean acquiescence. You can't say that VT acquiesces there. She accepts, and then she has some strategies, So I think, I wish.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, great question.
Yes, I think we're getting close to the end of the time, but I know if there are other questions, we can continue one-on-one conversation.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for talking about
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks.